Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Speed to Market Innovation Report featuring Jim Van Dyke, also sponsored by Comrade, a CI&T company, as well as CI&T. This is Felton McMillan, founder and CEO of Comrade, and I'm excited to have you participate today and dig into the findings of Jim's research over the past couple of months. A couple of quick notes. First, we are going to be recording this webinar, so it will be available after the live webinar, so please feel free to share it with colleagues, anyone you think that would find it valuable. Second, we're going to have our presentation be around 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answer from the participants for another 15 minutes. As you can see on the interface, please do submit your questions throughout. We'll have those in a queue, and then we'll get through them in line once we get to the Q&A session. Also, the full report will be available for your download and viewing free of charge. This will be available after the live webinar, and we'll be sending those directly to you by email and give you instructions of how to access that. So look out for that. Also, we have Comrade and CI&T company has partnered with Jim Van Dyke a couple of times on a number of issues, really looking to help financial institutions improve their performance, their customer experience, and overall innovation. So we're very excited to partner again on this particular research study. So just really quickly about Comrade and CI&T. We recently joined forces in August of 2017. We are about 2,500 strong worldwide, and we're focused on working with larger organizations to help them rapidly deliver experiences people love. And so that is end-to-end from strategy all the way through execution, and we have offices around the world. Some of the key clients that we work with, we have a lot of financial institutions that we've worked with, both globally as well as on a smaller scale in terms of credit unions, community banks. We've also worked with 38 fintechs, ranging from early stage startup to well-funded to the largest fintechs globally that provide a myriad of products and services and platforms to financial institutions. So we're bringing that expertise to the conversation in addition to Jim's findings. So what we are focused on as an organization is really helping our clients in the financial service and fintech sector improve their experiences, get products and services to market that add value to not only customers and users, but also their banks and the financial organization. But we're also, since 2008, have really been focused on helping people improve their relationship with their money. So we've really spent a lot of our time pursuing that goal, and that's really why we've built out the financial service practice that we have and have worked with so many financial institutions. If you think about what we do, there's really three areas of focus. One is helping organizations figure out what problems to solve, and then are we meeting the right needs. Second is making sure that we're helping them build the right things, whether that's through vendor partnerships or custom-built solutions. And then finally, making sure that we can help them both by teaching and doing, help them build those things faster, better, at scale. Those are really the key areas that we focus on. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim and let him go through the research findings. Jim?
Great. Thanks, Felton. I appreciate that, and good to see a lot of people on the call. Some of you participated in the research, and thank you for doing that, and many people I know. So I'll just mention that once again, I appreciate Felton, you, and Comrade, and now CI&T sponsoring this independent research study. And as with every study that I now do, just as in my past as CEO of Javelin Strategy and Research, another organization that became part of Forrester, any study I do is an independent research study, meaning the data is the data. And I look forward to bringing the data to life on this call today, to making sure it's of benefit. So as Felton mentioned, if you have a question or a comment, or there's something that you're really hoping we touch on, please don't wait to the end to type that in the dialog box. Just type it in early, and you actually get to influence this webinar, the live webinar, and you get to be a participant, not just a listener on it. So we, for this independent work, again, thanks Felton and Comrade for making it possible. So I interviewed, I should say, and I'm the only one that was on these in these conversations with people, 28 leaders in digital, CX, innovation, line of business, or IT, variety of functions, but all were people that significantly led or shaped major innovation projects in a financial institution or a payments firm. And these could be organizations. A lot of them were in the U.S., majority were. One was Canada only. Several people had experience in both Canada and the U.S., and several others had global experience, which is increasingly the background that people come from when you look at U.S. banks as well. So these were a wide variety of people serving both retail, wholesale, in lines of business, including asset management, banking, card issuance, you name it. We really covered the gamut by design. Essentially, I asked 3 questions of people, and they all had the opportunity to go off the record. Some people chose to list their own name and their organization's name, and they're cited heavily in the report, and I'll touch on a few people's names in the webinar as well. I essentially asked people 3 questions. Number 1, your biggest, most challenging innovation projects, how do you structure them in terms of stages? And note that this is perception research. So this is much more like, these are in-depth interviews, much more like you conduct in qualitative or focus groups, where what is significant is how people characterize something. I wasn't trying to force someone into a quantitative structure like I often do in other types of studies. So it's significant how they labeled it. Also, how long does the overall project take? Which might seem like a tough question to answer, but nearly everybody was willing to answer it. I had to help them with the confines to do that. So the answers range from 9 months to 5 years, if you can believe it, with a typical length of 21 and a half months. That's the mode or the most common response, and the mean was 24 months. And what did they learn to do or not to do? In other words, best and worst practices about getting big innovation projects to market faster and doing it in a way that meets customer needs. So I found this process absolutely fascinating. And for quick background, I was a product manager for the first half of my career prior to going to research. And people kept giving me product management jobs, so I guess I did okay. But I feel like my niche is much more in research. So I have a lot of empathy for people in the product management role. One of the things we learned was that, and this is not a typo on the left, is FIs must lean, in other words, practice lean methods. It's our job to be ahead of the curve as researchers. Oftentimes, most of this webinar and report is about reporting back what we heard. But people also want us to say, what do we think that we should have heard more of, or what do we think is coming next that wasn't talked about? So we'll talk more about this throughout, and Selton will touch on this as well, since Comrade is in the business of speeding up time to market and helping people be more on track with needs. That's why they commissioned the study. Our takeaway is that people didn't talk enough about lean, but they did rightly talk a lot about waterfall and agile versus waterfall. And what was interesting, not hugely surprising, but that the mean average project duration times from unapproved idea to general market availability differed significantly based on the model that people describe themselves as being in. So you can see the numbers for yourself. Waterfall, a little over 2 years. If they were a mixture of waterfall and agile, and in those cases they were generally moving to agile or agile for digital only, 19, and if they were agile only, 16. So here's an interesting thing. I think it's more of an interesting thing actually than a big takeaway, but it was interesting enough for me to put it in here, that only the very largest banks, so that would be like in the U.S. the top 4, or actually Canada the top ones as well, and around the globe, as well as the smallest credit unions, many of whom are also highly innovative but in a different way, are reporting the shortest cycle time. So one might guess that those advantages of typically half as much in duration times, or for the same reason, but actually they're for very different reasons. So big banks are often development shops. You know, I had one top 4 banking leader that, Comrade, you actually do a lot of work with them. I don't have permission to mention his name and his contact. He said, look, we're a development shop. We have thousands of developers. We have people in India, all in so many countries. And so we can just build things on our own. We use highly agile methods. Now, the smaller credit unions, well, they just go straight to the board, and they don't have to wait for annual cycle times in many cases, and they just get stuff done. Now, they're often vendor reliant, so arguably they may not have as much charge of the destiny. So this chart, which has a lot of information, and I won't read off everything on it, and we will come back to it because it's pretty significant. This had to do with the first question I asked in the study. You know, just for a healthy methodology, I first asked respondents, describe to me in your own language what your major steps are to consider an idea and to get to general customer availability. And there is not necessarily a correlation, just to correct what may look like I'm saying there's a correlation between type of FI and even what their footprint is around the globe versus US, what have you. And methodology. There wasn't necessarily one, although the larger FIs certainly are more agile. But here's just a sampling. And what was number one thing that was interesting is that all 28 respondents described these radically differently. I mean, there should be differences, of course, but it shouldn't be that different in a normal life cycle. I mean, everything that changes has a life cycle to it. I mean, plants, you name it, you know, car development, fintech, no question. So what do I take away from that? Well, we're early in the maturation stage of technology development. And also, I would add, and we discussed this a lot in the report, that FIs need to be more like software companies in having extremely lean methods that adapt as quickly as customers adapt and as quickly as market opportunities, windows open and close. But if you look out here, you'll see a couple of things. One is when I asked the question, tell me about going from ideation to full launch, a couple of people said, hold on a minute, like one global card brand, and I'm drawing a blank on who the other one was at the moment. And they said, we don't allow any idea to get anywhere unless it has a problem statement. So that was brilliant that they would say that. You know, of course, we could talk about it over lunch or whatever, but we're not going to devote process resources to it. And I thought it was very healthy. And these were in very innovative organizations. So bring us, they would say to their people across the organization, bring us your ideations with a problem statement. So that was great. Also, if you look at things like global FI, third one from the top, this particular one, which is one of the most innovative FIs out there, you all have a great deal of admiration for them. They have methods like customer journeys and quick prototyping, which are classic lean methods that we'll talk more about. That wasn't the case in a lot of places. So a lot of people have agile methods, not necessarily as many lean methods. So a lot of variety. I liked what second from the bottom, the Telco Credit Union had, which is a very innovative credit union. And they just really simplify everything in this 4Ds model. And now the bank at the bottom, I wish I could share the name of this bank. They're top 10. They're not necessarily a digital leader everywhere, but they have a particular feature that all of you are well acquainted with because it had a lot of leadership in it. They have approval stages throughout their life cycle. And that's really something to look for, not just the number of stages you have, because here they have 12 distinct stages, but so many cases where people have to go back to upper management and say, can we get your approval to move forward? Can we get your approval to move forward? So good governance can sometimes be governance that just kills your ability to get things to market. And indeed, that bank does not have a lot of innovative things going on. So speaking of that, ideation. This was really striking to me in that the people I talked with, and I could almost I wish if I went back, I could easily do this actually, and tagged people based on my own sense of the morale and the optimism that people had about their future competitiveness, and maybe even my projection of how long the interviewee is likely to be still working for the company a year from now, because my guess is some of these people have their resumes out there right now. A lot of people just simply came out and said it in a confidential interview. Ideas in our shop are only allowed to come from executives. Now, I doubt if I were to talk to those executives that they believe that's the case, which shows this dichotomy, which can be deadly. In those shops, because of knowing a lot of the folks that I interviewed for a while, these tended to be laggard shops that feel like they just can't win in innovation. So they said, you know what, we're just not going to be first. We're going to be fast follower, which is usually code word for laggard, let's be honest. And in these shops, and in fact, one of them, I remember thinking of a few of these folks that were just demoralized if they described themselves as being essentially top-down, my label. I thought some of these people, they're just not going to be working where they are. And in fact, one of these people that I had predicted to myself won't be there for long has told me he's already left for another company. One individual said to me, she's a youngish fintech leader here in the Bay Area, who I've followed. She's steadily advanced, going from company to company. And she said, look, I have her full quote in the report, as are so many other things. So look, advocacy and communication are everything. You have to be advocating all the time. And the organization she works is just particularly known for being more of an old boys network. And so she just knows that's something she has to be doing. So innovation leaders, you have to be used to doing that all the time. You can never stop. It's not enough to be a great, and even a lean developer, you have to be advocating all the time. By the way, I'm going through kind of a grab bag by design of a number of topics that are not, where there isn't a neat segue necessarily from one to the other, because that's just the way the order works. On some of these, when we get into the report, we have sections on each of these. APIs are a huge deal. I know a lot of you are focused on them. If you're not, maybe something you want to consider, with the idea being that the core itself becomes, as one individual, we had permission to mention her name, Tina Giorgio from ICBA, who is they're essentially the card processor and platform that a lot of community institutions run on. So that's eventually going to become the check register, and it's it's going to be all the middleware that runs everything. Well, the APIs are how you get there. And another individual I've worked with from a top 15 U.S. regional bank, they have some strong digital capabilities. Said we're going to be publishing our APIs to the world here. We're working on that very hard right now. Another individual who said to me, look, he's with a card issuer and he's not in the area. His job is to come up with innovations, but not related to rewards. Said, look, anybody that's coming up with innovations in our shop, if they're not related to rewards, you're essentially you have an uphill battle. And so he just needs to accept that and compare himself to, sort of accept the new normal. Sometimes your most risk-averse people, or your most surprising people in this case, can be innovation rock stars. So my ideal slide deck always has at least one musician or a person on a bicycle, so I'm checking the box just because that's some of my interests. And this is Leonard Cohen, who, rest in peace, made it to be in his 80s as a rock star. He wasn't even supposed to be a musician. He was a poet, and he surprised himself as much as anybody coming in that line of work. But my point in this is that you need to let yourself be surprised. Why? Because 3 of the respondents out of the 28 that I talked to expressed their surprise in saying people from compliance or risk are some of their best innovators. And they don't have any critical innovation project going forward, in some of these shops without letting someone that has that skill set of innovation that happens to be in a risk or compliance where you don't expect that at the table. Now, here is something interesting from a top 4 bank that is particularly strong at innovation, and all of you fear this particular competitor. And they say, look, we don't launch anything in mobile first. Test anything in mobile first or develop in mobile first. For us, it's mobile only. Online is a complete afterthought. And another top 15 regional said, look, we're even lucky. We'll consider ourselves lucky if our online is even holding its own in adoption this year, because mobile is where all the growth is. A number of you told me that. Point is, just develop in mobile. Online's easy. Trying to become mobile first, you're 2 stages behind. Why not just leapfrog into mobile first? Mobile only. Why focus on mobile first? It's not really an accomplishment nowadays. Vendor relationships, as with regard to achieving speed to market and the ability to meet customer needs, was a big subject that people brought up, and spent a lot of time on. It's in the report. the major themes were this. Largest and smallest FIs, and sometimes in opposite ways, get these better than average results. I talked about that. The vendor lock-in issue was mentioned by several, especially smaller FIs, occasionally big ones, and how they deal with it. It's a big challenge, and people are saying sometimes you choose the vendor now based on what they have, but then 2 or 3 years from now, then they don't want to come up with anything or they don't want to allow anything to connect to their core capability or their middleware capability if they didn't create it, because they're going to lose the revenue. So they come up with the reasons for slowing things down. Some in the lower left avoid the RFP process, particularly the larger FIs. If they might find a particular vendor that they see as innovative and just say, we're going to choose that one. One credit union in Canada, Meridian, said, look, our strategy, I talked a little bit about them in the report, said our approach is to actually look for vendors who we think are frustrated because they want to get into the big banks and say, look, you can get in with a strong middle market provider like us, and we want to use your desperation to allow you to focus hard on partnering with us. It's an interesting strategy. And then on the right-hand side, my takeaway was that FIs must always, though, even when you work with vendors, you can never ever leave it to the vendor to tell you what the marketplace needs, or be your sole provider on the pulse of where the marketplace is going. And I would just implore a lot of you at financial institutions, particularly smaller ones with many mid-sized players, when you're having your periodic meetings or you're assembling other findings, you're getting research from your tech vendors, and because you know they're willing to get on a plane at no charge and show up at your meetings. And guess what? All answers point to buy our tech platform. It's, they're not in the research business, and their bias will creep into that. So I would urge caution on that. What about customer research? Well, I heard an interesting variety of approaches here. On one side, on the left, some people said, look, you need to make sure you have a balance, because you can actually have customer research if it's too siloed in your organization, or too much as a one and done stage. It can actually slow you down. And as a researcher myself, I'll say, yeah, you can go too far with it, or mainly you can go in the wrong direction with it if it's like this staccato thing you do. Now, research should be something you're doing all the time. And that's actually part of the lean process, always listening to customers and adjusting, not so much on the fly, but just as a matter of course. So one top issuer who's particularly innovative said, look, our mantra is this: everybody just listen up to customers, that is, in code. Just listen and code. That's what we want people to think of every single day. So one global payment firm said to me, look, you really need to focus on balancing out your roadmap, because the idea is you'll have, these numbers aren't necessarily the right numbers for everybody. At any given time in his organization, he said you're going to have only 20% truly innovative, as in disruptive in a positive way to customers' capabilities. You'll have 20% must-do or vanilla things. Maybe it's compliance or platform or whatever. 60% new features, but if we're honest, they're not really innovative. They're not breakthroughs. So figure out what your numbers are, and then the competitive advantages in making sure you're balanced, because you don't want to, at 1 quarter or 1 year, have a whole bunch of innovations at the expense of having them at the next period. Balance that out, and then you can go back to the product managers, report to you and say, I think we're out of balance here a little bit. Let's reprioritize. What about innovation labs? A lot of people brought them up. Some of you large bankers, you've had me spend sometimes an entire day, especially when I ran Javelin or when I was at a unit of what is now a unit of Foresters. It used to be a separate company. And you were so proud of your innovation labs. You got me on a plane and said, spend all day here. And sometimes I thought, oh my God, these people are just inventing flying dogs. This stuff is never going to turn into a product. But I love innovation. And some cases, innovation labs are just so disconnected. As one person says, they lack a sense of urgency. Another person said they're better at creating PowerPoint decks than they are in creating products. However, a number of people who contributed to this report have innovation in their title. and they're doing a great job with it. So I went in with a bit of a negative bias into this research, really questioning the value because I've been to so many of these dog and pony shows. I came out more open-minded than I went in, and so therefore it's real research. I always like to say to people, if you think you're research-driven but you can't point to a time in the last few days where you didn't change your preconceived notion based on research, you're not really open to research. I was proven a bit wrong. And I'll say like Meridian Credit Union, I mentioned them before, they're using innovation as a function, and they're spreading it out through the innovation function to 10 different cross-discipline people. Wells Fargo has recently gone that way and seems to be having some success with it. So it's really it reflects the unique fingerprint or DNA of the organization, and sometimes might solve a problem. Capital One is folding innovation back in the organization. You need to, different topic, this is a really important one also discussed in the study, create a standard process to help people navigate your complexity. Who's doing this? Well, BBVA is doing this there's a link within our research study that you can follow. It's really short PowerPoint they have about how they create these teams of 3 people in 3 different functions. Another organization uses people from 10 different functions. The number doesn't so much matter as does this best practice. Because it's hard to navigate through your organization, one asset manager really talked in frustrating terms about how he's at odds with people in their global offices who just don't get it. So things don't go as fast as they should. Decide what cross-functional representation must accompany every project from ideation or even problem solving through GA, and then make sure that's assigned once something's approved, and that team stays assigned to it, and develop the nature of it based on your organization. Another topic is passion. This was explained to me by a fintech executive and then echoed by others, that as you go to more lean or even agile methods, one of the surprises you'll get is not just time to market and a better match with customer needs, but you'll get people that are more engaged so they don't turn over, and you can attract tech talent. So passion is what people have, and they found this individual, she found it in her organization. So we talked, I'll just look over at Felton here and see if he wants to mention anything on this area. This is the one slide we're repeating because we found some interesting things about these unique stages, and these are just an example of all the 28 that were different.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that what Jim's research uncovered in speaking to 28 different leaders across financial services, and how we were able to look at and synthesize the findings and try to dig into it a little bit, was very consistent with our experience working with financial services directly. And that we really have just begun the discussion, and different organizations are very different levels of maturity. A lot of the focus that is top of mind for people is really agile versus waterfall. And if you think about it, that really only addresses at most a third of your end-to-end process. It doesn't really address, are you actually solving a problem? Are you actually meeting a real need that customers have? And then are you making sure that you're testing using lean and prototyping and the scientific method to make sure you're testing your hypothesis, that you're actually going to be building the right thing or solving the right problem, or having people stop doing the things that are actually going to create value for the organization and the end user. So what we really looked at was, while Agile is fantastic and really its aim is to build great software solutions that adapt gracefully to change, and by the way, our belief is that it doesn't mean there aren't controls. Some purists in Agile say you don't need controls, you don't need any documentation, let's just start building. We disagree with that. A best practice is to really make sure there are controls, you have KPIs, key performance indicators that you're measuring against, and also that you are making sure that up front, and I'll talk about this in a second, you're spending the time correctly to really define the problem and define what it is that you're building and test it to make sure that the products and experiences that go into an Agile software development process are actually well-defined, and actually they must be defined. We see that all the time as we work with different product groups of different levels of sophistication there. So if we look at the next point here, as I said, really the focus has been on Agile versus waterfall for most organizations. Jim did uncover best practices around design thinking, problem solving and lean practices in some of the organizations, but we're still at the beginning of the journey for financial institutions. Comrade and CI&T also work with a lot of software companies. Google is a client of ours and a variety of other technology companies. And so when we looked at how to compare the best practices and sort of where the state of the state is for financial institutions compared to those software companies, we're way behind, guys. And so the real opportunity is to transform your end-to-end process. Not just focus on Agile, which is around build the right thing, but it's also around design thinking, which allows you to understand the problem, lean, which helps you figure out how to build the right thing, and also start to understand that across all of these, we need to understand the root causes and not just jump to requirements and not just jump to a solution. So in our view, the things to think about are really developing the mindsets, the competencies, and the toolkits to make sure that they're understood across the whole organization and that you're able to master them so that you can make lasting improvements and actually drive the behavioral change within the organization and the habits that will help you go faster and transform your organization.
Great, and that's really, as I mentioned earlier, because I think one of the big in running a number of research organizations now, one of the top criticisms of research that people have of researchers is, look, you didn't bring it to a big finding, or you didn't tell us what you think we should do. And so I've learned to be on guard with that. And so I always think of what didn't I hear in the study that I think we should have heard. And I'm putting a different spin on what you just said, Dalton, if I may, which is that we heard, for all the right reasons, a lot of people talk about Agile and waterfall, and I didn't bring it up at a single interview, and the majority of the interviewees brought it up, and it's a big thing in their shop. And as you saw the correlation to time to market, justifiably so. So it made sense. Having said that, the thing that we would have liked to have seen, and actually I think the reason, Dalton, that you and Comrade and CI&T came to me and said, look, we're a lean shop. We want to understand what's going on in the market in context of saying where are the opportunities for us to help people is a lean methodologies, which is not the same. And we get into an explanation in case people say, I don't get it, I'm not sure, I'm just coming up to speed on Agile, or this whole discussion is confusing to me. We touch on it there, and then we have some references. I'll be honest saying I'm still a student in this as well. So that was what we didn't hear enough about, was lean and design thinking. And in fact, what was interesting, so then as we had a lot of post-research discussion internally, saying, well, how do we make sense of these findings? I looked back at my interviews with a few of the banking leaders that have acquired, and I don't have permission to mention their names, but I'll give a very broad hint that I think will be okay. So these are large banks that have acquired design firms. Probably everybody's chuckling, go, okay, you just gave it away. Now I know who they are. Those particular firms are some of the fastest ones at bringing big, innovative things to market and achieving design excellence. And actually, I'll give a shout out to Mytech and a study we did for them last week on this, not just because it's a study that assesses CX in a particular thing. In that case, it was mobile deposit. You can get it on Mytech's site, or you can, if you're not sure where to go, you can just go on the Future Insight, but Mytech Systems. And so here's the thing. Some of the shops, some of the people that were rated the highest in customer experience through a structured methodology that I worked within, with Comrade's designers on ratings, so we had CX designers rate it. Those are people that are using lean methods the most. I could see evidence of it in 2 slides earlier where we had that. Where is it? Well, they were talking about prototyping and customer journeys and other lean type things. And guess what? They ranked the top in CX. So the evidence is there. So with that, I'm doing a 2-for-1. And I'm also always very cautious as you type your questions and comments in, by the way. Usually I never list off the names of people that ask questions because it might divulge something that's sensitive. But in this case, Mike Diamond actually, Mytech just asked a question a bit ago, so staying on that topic. He asked, it seems an accepted truism that banks need to move off their legacy cores to compete. Yes, that's true, these 30-year-old systems. Any sense that this is being treated as an urgent need versus a far-off threat among the large FIs you spoke with? It's a really relevant question because the core, even though it's not something that the customer directly sees. Generally, it can't see nakedly, what's going on with the core. Of course, it affects real-time payments and the ability to get controls and alerts and all that. So, no, unfortunately, there is no evidence people talked about cores all the time and being locked in, what they can't do. No evidence of life in core replacement or updating. All we saw was evidence of people being more resigned to saying, we have to make the core the equivalent of the dumb pipes. This has to be like the dumb register. And just create essentially these workarounds. So payments are posted in real time, even though the core doesn't get updated until the next 24-hour batch, or we have multiple batching times to work around. I think folks, you know what I mean by that. So no, there's bad news and then lots of workarounds to make that happen. So with that, Dalton, let me hand things over back to you. And again, I just want to thank participants because many people of you are on this call today. I really appreciate the time you took in helping us. And so Dalton, maybe you could just guide us through the questions that we have.
Sure. Well, I think we just got one from Jim, from Mike Diamond. I think one of the other questions here that we got is, are you considering repeating the study, and are you open to input in related areas? We'd like to have you consider researching. So I think the short answer is yes, we wanted to do this research with Jim to really understand, again, what the state of the state is and try to help financial institutions compare themselves to best practices both amongst financial institutions as well as start to help them think about some of the best practices that come from software or other technology companies so they can start to compare themselves to those organizations because their customers do compare their experiences, their end customer experience against other innovators in the technology space. So yes, we are open and looking to repeat this study as we go forward, assuming it continues to add value and helpful insight to our clients and just the general financial service industry. So the other question is, you mentioned the source of ideas, top-down, et cetera, as being critical. How can an organization realistically self-assess this in order for executives to understand potential risks? So this is a great question around a self-awareness of an organization, try to understand, are they actually allowing ideas to come from everywhere so that there's good engagement, there's good morale, and that the organization is benefiting from the multiple perspectives that live inside of these large organizations. So Jim, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, and my sense is that a lot of people, whether they're mid-level leaders or especially senior executives, is because we, like a lot of things where we put a judgment on something, we say, look, everybody is supposed to be fairly open-minded, and all these things that we think good people, with quote marks around that, are supposed to be. We don't allow in our minds room for the idea that potentially we're not in this camp that we consider to be the good camp. Having said that, that represents a blind spot for leaders and executives. So I think what I hear is in that question is maybe somebody diplomatically saying, how could I get my executives in my organization, or how can I get me if I'm blind to the fact that perhaps I'm top down and I don't want to be, to understand realistically what camp I'm in. Here's what I would do. I would recommend that an organization identify a previous quantity of previous innovative things that were created. Just say we're going to go back and look at the last 5 or 10 significant things we launched. Agree on what those are first, which one, by name. Now we're going to go back and say, where did that idea come from? Because rather than immediately saying, well, sure, we're open to ideas because we have to be. If we didn't, that would mean we have a high turnover risk or we're going to be slow in the future. Figure out what your most recent big innovations are, and then go backward and say, let's hunt that. Let's go in reverse. Look at the headwaters and say, where did that originally come from? And from that, you should be able to figure out, if there were 10 of them, and you said 7 of them came from executives, and only a few were actually originated by a customer or people that are actually coding or working in various lines of business functions, well, then you have your answer. I wanted to ask you as well, Felton, that question I meant to ask earlier. So, you commissioned this study because FIs must be focused on achieving speed at scale in order to win. So given that, I know I'm changing the order up a little bit by asking you a question, and as you're asking me some of the questions we have coming in, but since you're the whole meaning of your business is speeding up time to market and getting a better match with customer needs, a lot of people can get their technology from wherever they want to get it, but you help them essentially get more out of their technology spend by doing that. What are your recommendations within the whole thread of the research we have?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. I think in looking at our practical expertise and experience working with clients, CI&T has been working with global organizations, helping them adopt and use lean practices for over a decade now. We've been working with organizations using design thinking and customer research and insight in these practices since 2006 ourselves. A few of the key things I think are really important. I think just to finish off on the last question that one of the participants had was around what leadership does. We see one of the first key steps is actually start lasting cultural transformation. We do believe it needs to be a transformation across the whole organization by changing what leadership does. And instead of having leadership think that they are required or beholden to their ideas and that that's where the source of guidance and leadership and progress for the firm comes from, really look at how they can enable and help the organization develop these mindsets around problem solving, around testing using scientific methods, which is a key part of lean, prototyping, and how to cut release cycles down and rethink the way that their end-to-end process is so that they can actually transform. Second thing we've learned is making that transformation possible by introducing gradual change with rapid business results. So one of the key things we say there is prioritize learning and adapting over analysis and prediction. The idea or the thought process that we can predict what's going to happen, what customers are going to need, and I've had these conversations with many clients myself. By the time we get something to market, it's 2.5 years out. By the time we get it to market, someone's already passed this. It's already stale and irrelevant. So if we're still thinking in terms of multi-year roadmaps and multi-year, we're going to predict what the future is going to hold, I think that's flawed thinking. And I think you really have to prioritize learning and adapting over analysis and prediction. I think one of the things we've also seen that has two parts to it. One is we're very strong proponents of customer journey mapping and really trying to understand how to empathize with customers to understand their needs and problems and pain points and moments of delight and friction. But it's equally important to also understand what your employees are going through, their experience, their tools, their journey, to make sure that you can actually deliver those innovative customer experiences and deliver on your promises. So making sure you're taking care of your employees with their process and tools as much as you are your customers with their innovative process and tools and innovations is really important. I think the other piece is as we identify new opportunities in the upfront problem-solving ideation phases, make sure that we're balancing or equating user needs to business needs throughout the process from strategy execution. So what does that mean? That means measure and manage to outcomes, not just outputs. It's not good enough to say, we got this thing to market, congratulations, we met a timeline, we met a deadline. No, it's not good enough. It is an outcome. Did we drive engagement and adoption of a new innovative service that helps differentiate us or helps drive down costs? Did we actually achieve an outcome? I think is very, very important in terms of what to manage and what to measure and how to think differently about how to focus your teams and your resources.
Well, I think a couple of things. You mentioned cross-functional teams in there. I think that's my interpretation of what you said about employees, and I think about where I talked in the study about what DBVA and Meridian or others are doing, and assigning employees and people that represent the customers as well. And also a comment you mentioned about your point of view is almost word for word of what Christy Brandon of Co-America said, and I think I'm attributing this properly to her, which said, if we don't, if we take the traditional amount of time that it's taken to get products to market of a few years, then the customer needs will already change by the time we get there. And so it's not only do you miss the target, but you've wasted all that investment. So I think we also had the, I want to just touch maybe about one closing question. We had about small FIs, which is small FIs have much less ability to influence their innovation roadmaps due to budget, being more reliant on existing vendors, and seeking tech talent. from your research, what are the most innovative small FIs doing to address this? So what I have found is that some small FIs are banding together to prioritize features, because if you look at it from flipping around my answer to that, I think when you're in a when you're in a stalemate situation, kind of like if you've ever been on a debate team or something, you're sometimes can further your own point of view or goals if you understand the point of view or goals of your opponent, as it were, and you're not supposed to be an opponent with your vendor. But let's face it, that's how many small FIs are describing their vendor relationship. They're describing that it's like a marriage that went sour, and they just can't wait to get out of it. And it's bad. I mean, it's horrible to be in. And so the majority of people have found themselves in that today. My characterization. I'm talking about core providers, if we're honest. And that's just right or wrong, the way things are being described. And so what you need to do is say, from a vendor perspective, what they would say is that they get too many diverse requests, and they're all A priorities coming in from FIs who all insist they are so unique in their field of membership, if it's a credit union, or their marketplace needs, it's agriculture versus manufacturing, whatever. But you know, the reality is very few of those needs actually reflect the market. And if the banks or credit unions could get together and consolidate their requests based on what is truly strategic and serving up bottom line value to investors, to customers, to members, they could get more of the truly critical ones done. Just push the egos aside. And along with that, don't leave out the opportunity to apply lean methodologies to your existing technology, the way you shape it and bring it to market. It's kind of like the study that we released last week from ITech that found that a lot of the CX work, customer experience around policies, is what's determining the whole, by definition, of course, the customer experience. Things like policy limits and how you communicate whether or not you charge for things, and how you view risk is what determines the customer experience. I think a lot of banks and financial institutions, payment firms, are thinking they can't control the customer experience because they can't influence the technology roadmap, when in fact so much more determines the totality of the customer experience. And that's where lean practices should be more of what FIs are focused on. Don't just obsess because you're upset with a vendor not prioritizing what's on your roadmap. Realize you have more influence on the total CX than you think you do.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're out of time. I just wanted to thank all the participants for listening in and joining us and your questions. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully you found this insightful and helpful. Jim and I are available for follow-up discussions if you'd like to explore the findings more deeply or discuss anything about your particular situation. We're certainly available and open to do that with you. Just let us know. And I'd also like to thank Jim Van Dyke for engaging in this research and helping us understand the state of the state with respect to speed to market, getting innovations from idea to in the hands of customers and users within financial institutions. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. We appreciate your participation.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Comrade. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day.